Hello and welcome to today's Crane Shares webinar. Trump's man in Beijing discusses U.S.-China relations post-election. My name is Brendan Ahern. I'm the Chief Investment Officer here at Crane Shares. I can think of no better people than to discuss President Trump's second term than my two guests today, former ambassadors Terry Branstad and David Edelman. David is our general counsel here at Crane Shares. Well, Ambassador Branstad was the longest running governor in the history of the United States, having served the good people of Iowa over many decades, but also served under President Trump as the U.S. ambassador to China. Again, I can think of no better than Terry and David to help us navigate, foresee, and understand what a second term for President Trump will look like. Please proactively ask questions during the webinar as we hope for a lively Q&A after the presentation. If you're viewing us on craneshares.com, please proactively email us at info@craneshares.com. While for those of you joining us on Zoom, please use the Q&A, the chat button, to submit questions. For CFP, CIMA, and CPT, continuing education credits, please email us at CharlieEdward@craneshares.com. For those of you less familiar with Crane Shares, I want to briefly give a little bit of a background on who we are. Our founder, Jonathan Crane, formed two core beliefs during his experience living and building a successful business in China. These two core beliefs were the basis for founding Crane Shares back in 2012. The first was that new China sectors, such as domestic consumption, e-commerce, mobile payments, semiconductors, clean energy, and healthcare, were becoming the new drivers of China's economy. Those sectors were really underrepresented in global indices and investors' portfolios. The second thesis was the opening of mainland China's capital markets, the Shanghai and Shenzhen equity markets, to foreign investors beginning in 2001 would have a material impact on global indices and investors' portfolios. And that really led to the foundation of Crane Shares, which is most importantly is about research and data, that we endeavor to earn the trust of investors through our balanced perspective on China's economy and capital markets. We believe that China's continued economic rise, as well as its significant weight in global indices, requires investors to have a data-driven partner to navigate what's occurring in China. We maintain a daily research blog called ChinaLastNight.com. It's a free resource that you can subscribe to. It provides just a very concise overview of what's happening in China. I actually recommend you read today's, where JD.com, the big e-commerce company, had their results, which we dive into, but more importantly, their CEO, she provided some outstanding insights from in China about what's happening with China's economy. Again, I want to dive into it today. We have a full suite of China exchange-traded funds, but Crane Shares is more than just China. We've actually pioneered investing in carbon credit allowance futures, as well as we've launched several exchange-traded funds for partners of ours, including Nancy Davis of Quadratic, the largest hedge fund, publicly traded hedge fund manager globally, Man Group, as well as the well-known managed future CTA firm, Mount Lucas. With that, I want to hand things off to my colleague, David, for a proper introduction of our longtime friend and advisor to our firm, Terry Branstad.
Brendan, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to a very timely discussion of U.S.-China relations. And as Brendan has said, we have a terrific guest and conversation lined up with our friend and advisor to Crane Shares, former U.S. Ambassador Terry Branstad. In most places, Terry needs no introduction. He was Donald Trump's ambassador to China during Trump's first term. He was America's man in Beijing at a very critical time. His government service career prior to that is legendary. The longest serving U.S. governor in history, I think, elected 6 different times to the executive mansion in Iowa. I did want to do one final bit of housekeeping. I know we have several members of the press who are listening in and participating. This is going to be an off-the-record conversation we're going to have with Ambassador Branstad. If you do have interest in on-the-record comments or an interview, please make an inquiry through info@craneshares.com. So again, this is off the record, and thank you for respecting that ground rule. Terry, I guess the best way to start off is to remind everyone that you sit uniquely in this world. You are the one individual, I think, who knows personally Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. You know the leaders of the 2 largest economies in the world, and we come at a time when this strategic competition between the U.S. and China is in full flare, and we can expect the Trump administration to, in many ways, pick up where you and President Trump left off 4 years ago. Although the world has changed, there's war in Europe, there's war in the Middle East. Nonetheless, the tension across the Pacific continues. Donald Trump is a unique character, I think, on the global stage, and he's unique and different in the way he approaches international relations. We at CraneShares have a theory that in the same way President Nixon was well suited to go to China in 1973, Donald Trump is especially well suited to negotiate a grand bargain across the Pacific with President Xi. And you, in fact, Terry, were the U.S. ambassador in China the last time the United States and China came to agreement around a substantial trade deal. So I guess I want to kick it off there, get your reaction to our view that a Trump administration may be well positioned to negotiate with China. And of course, we'll want you to talk about export controls, all the talk of tariffs on goods and services, and the other dynamics at work, including the newly announced nominee for U.S. Secretary of State, U.S. Senator from Florida, Marco Rubio. Terry, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, David and Brendan. I'm very pleased to be on this call with you. And I am in kind of a unique situation because I was the first American governor to host Xi Jinping when he was just a 31-year-old young man who was a party secretary in one of the counties of Hebei province, which is a sister state to Iowa. I'd signed the sister state in '83. I went to China in '84, and we were treated so well that we went all out to make Xi Jinping feel very welcome in Iowa. And he calls me and all the people he met in Iowa in 1985 old friends. And when my son Eric, my oldest son, was chair of Trump's 2016 and 2020 campaigns in Iowa, he told Donald Trump that I had a great relationship with Xi Jinping, and I think that's why I was chosen as ambassador. We were there at a unique time when COVID started and when the first phase 1 trade agreement was finally reached. It was a long, hard battle to get there. Trump did something that no American governor, no American president had done before. He imposed tariffs on China. I think that got their attention, and it was, I think, a critical element that helped us get the phase 1 agreement. I'm hopeful. First of all, I think the situation is more complicated today than it was then. We have the wars in both Ukraine and the Middle East. And of course, Trump's campaign primarily focused on domestic issues, on helping American workers and American farmers and American consumers by addressing the problems of the open border and the inflation that has affected buying power of people and driven up the costs of so many things, including buying a home, insurance, and just the cost of gasoline and groceries. Trump is already off to a quick start. I think clearly he's a lot more experienced today than he was when he came in the first time. A lot of people were surprised that he won the election. And this time around, he's got, first of all, the never Trumpers are gone from the Republican Party. He now has control of the party, and he is choosing people that are loyal and competent. And some of them are somewhat controversial, but clearly he wants people that are loyal to his presidency and are competent to do the job. So it's going to be an interesting and exciting time. And obviously, I think the relationship with China will not be at the top of the list, but it is very important because we are the two largest economies in the world. And Donald Trump likes to get people's attention, but he likes to do it in a way that's going to be beneficial to the American worker and to the American economy. And I think he also recognizes to reach a deal on trade, it has to be beneficial to both sides. So
well, that's a great segue. That's a great segue, Terry. During your time as the ambassador in Beijing, Trump, by executive order, enacted sort of with a very broad stroke across the board tariffs on goods traded from China, covering somewhere in the order of $300 billion annual in goods. Although there were many exceptions that were ultimately granted by then U.S. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. I'm interested in your take as to how China reacted and how you think that all played out during the first term, because the expectation is, at least initially, President Trump will return to the use of tariffs, not only as it relates to China, but tariffs with other major trading partners. But let's talk about China.
Well, I think he looks at tariffs as a mechanism to get attention and to really focus on improving the opportunities for American workers and American consumers. So if you look at it that way, but there's also a recognition that if you're going to reach a trade agreement, you have to have something that's going to be beneficial to both sides. So I think he's aware of that. He's obviously somebody with an extensive business background and wants to see, and I think he wants to be the leader that really revitalizes the American economy, makes America great again, improves the income and opportunity for American workers. And so the first things that he's focusing on is the border and deporting illegals, especially those with a criminal background, and then also trying to improve the economic opportunities for Americans, extending the tax cuts that are going to expire in 2025, and making America more competitive by reducing the bureaucracy. I think one of the things people are going to be surprised about, and this is long overdue, and that is Elon Musk and Ramaswamy are going to make dramatic recommendations for reducing the size and cost of the bureaucracy. I would also say federal workers are going to have to go back to work and not work from home. That's not going to be permitted in this new administration. And we may see a bunch of people leave because of that, as well as, so I just think it's going to be a very dramatic time and change. I'm not sure when but I also think that my son was involved in helping facilitate a message from Xi Jinping to Donald Trump, congratulating him on the election. And then also he worked with the Chinese ambassador to get a message back from Donald Trump to Xi Jinping. So my son who worked in the Department of Commerce with Wilbur Ross, is going to also be involved in helping advise them on who the leadership will be in the Department of Commerce going forward.
That's a very interesting that the congratulatory note came over so quickly from Beijing.
Right.
By all accounts, Ambassador Branstad, President Xi has a great deal of respect for President Trump. I know that helped you do a better job during your time. I'm interested in you commenting about to the extent you're at liberty to do so, commenting about conversations you had with President Xi, that may give us some insight into his take on President Trump. And then I do want to talk about the nuts and bolts a little bit about the tariffs, the exceptions, and export controls.
Well, we at the embassy facilitated, I think, 11 different calls between President Trump and President Xi. And most of those were initiated by President Trump. And of course, Trump visited China in 2017, a state visit. I encouraged him to bring with business people who were interested in making deals. And some of those were announced on that trip. And the relationship was good up until COVID. And Trump felt that he was not, that President Xi and the Chinese did not honestly really report on what was going on with COVID. And that kind of soured the relationship. But I'm hopeful that we will see, and we are the two biggest economies in the world. We're interdependent. The Chinese really need the safety and quality of American food, and American consumers appreciate the quality and affordability of consumer goods. And so consequently, I don't think you're going to see decoupling, but instead looking at some strategic changes that Trump feels will help the American worker, but also things that are going to hopefully benefit both of our countries and the world economy.
Ambassador, you make a very good point, this point of interdependence. And sometimes it's said that the U.S. economy and the Chinese economy are inextricably linked. I know in Iowa, you pay a lot of attention to agriculture, and China is by far the largest consumer, the largest customer for U.S. agriculture products. And I would imagine by far the largest customer for Iowa agriculture products.
Yeah, and we have a positive trade balance. The country doesn't, but the state of Iowa does, because we sell a lot of soybeans and pork, and we got the market for beef reopened when I was ambassador. So we're selling beef and chicken and sorghum, as well as pork and beef. Also, changes were made in insurance and financial services to open the Chinese market more for American involvement there as well. So that was all part of the phase one agreement. I'm hopeful that obviously it was intended that there would be a phase two, and hopefully in this new administration, we will see action in that score. I did gain a lot of respect for Robert Lighthizer. He worked very closely with Liu He, who was the chief negotiator for the Chinese, to reach the trade agreement that we got. I also would like to say Ted McKinney, who was kind of the lead agriculture negotiator, played a very key role. He now works for the association that represents state secretaries or commissioners of agriculture. And he was at the World Food Prize event that we had, the Borlaug Dialogue, just 2 weeks ago. So I had a good conversation with him, and I think he's somebody that can be helpful in recognizing the importance of agriculture exports from America to China.
And when I covered China for Goldman Sachs, we often talked about this pivotal month, this month of March of 2010, when for the first time, U.S. exports to Asia, not limited to China, but U.S. exports to Asia exceeded the level of U.S. exports to Europe. It was always our proof that the growing markets in Asia, and especially the growing purchasing power of the Chinese consumer, would be attractive to U.S. producers and U.S. providers of services. I know, as you mentioned, Iowa is at the top of that list for agricultural products, but it's not limited to agriculture. And so this issue of a trade war is interesting because there's the full expectation that there will be another increase in the across-the-board tariffs that were kept in place during the Biden administration. And we can expect that China will react. There may be at least some temporary retaliatory tariffs, both sides trying to create leverage. And we at Crane Shares believe creating the conditions, the environment for the grand bargain that Donald Trump is especially well suited to strike. I'm interested in you commenting on whether that is the case and when we could expect that, whether it be in the first half of this Trump term or in the first year of this Trump term, what the sense of urgency will be in the Trump White House. And secondly, I want you to talk about the exceptions, because I think that is the unwritten story of this sort of a tariff conversation, that during the Trump administration and then following on during the Biden administration, while the tariffs remained in place and that was the top line, there were many exceptions, so many exceptions that an argument was made the exceptions were actually overriding the rule, so that Chinese products were reaching American consumers and consumers in Europe, for that matter, avoiding the tariff. There's another tariff avoiding strategy, if you will, which we see around the world now, which is the reach of Chinese companies. A lot is made of Chinese electric vehicle manufacturing in Mexico, but there are Chinese factories in Europe, Chinese factories in Southeast Asia, Chinese factories in the Americas, all of which I think protect Chinese firms from the full brunt of these tariffs. I know there's a lot there, Ambassador, but I welcome your comments.
Well, President Trump looks at tariffs as a way to get leverage to get a better deal. And I think his goal, of course, would be convince Chinese that maybe they ought to build these products in America with American workers. And that would be something that would be, I think, well received. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, the public attitude in America has turned pretty negative about China. And obviously his appointments to key positions, I think, reflect that fact. But I also think he's realistic about what can be done to help American manufacturing companies, American consumers, and that's domestic is his priority. But I also think he recognizes we are a world economy. China is the second largest trader, and we need to have a way to work with them in a constructive way. He did that in his first term. I'm hopeful that will happen again.
There's also a lot of talk about export controls, and I'm wondering if you would comment about that. I know that was an issue at the top of your agenda when you were the U.S. ambassador in Beijing.
Well, one of the big concerns, and I think it's grown, is the idea of the Chinese using technology to take advantage of the United States, and especially in terms of military. So I think we're going to see, and we saw that even during the Biden administration, that there will be more restrictions on things that could have a impact on national defense. So I think we're going to see those restrictions continue and probably be enhanced. But the goal there is, of course, protect American consumers and especially American workers.
And Terry, at Crane Shares, we're often asked for our view on Taiwan and how the issue of Taiwan sort of relates to this sort of continuing economic interdependence. Trump has been very clear about his willingness to engage China economically, and I'm interested in your take as to where the Taiwan issue fits into this, especially with regard to export controls and Taiwan's, top of class, first in class semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem.
Well, and I think because of Taiwan's tremendous leadership in semiconductors, that is another reason why I think there won't be a shooting war with Taiwan, because neither China or the United States wants to see this technology destroyed, don't want to see the infrastructure in Taiwan destroyed. And China takes kind of the long view of thing. Xi Jinping would like to see Taiwan under the control of the mainland. But the people in Taiwan saw what happened to Hong Kong and are very leery of that. So but I don't think there's going to be anything significant happen in the near future. Obviously, if you have something like Nancy Pelosi going to Taipei, that creates some tension, as have some of the other things that have occurred. But I don't think there's an imminent danger of China attacking Taiwan. And I also think if they look at what's happened with Russia and Ukraine, they'll see that even though it's not very far away, it's not an easy landing in Taiwan. So I just and I think Xi Jinping takes the long view of things, and that's the reason why, although he certainly wants Taiwan under the control of mainland China, I don't see that as something that's likely to be imminent.
Yeah,
And that's consistent with the views we developed. When I was U.S. ambassador in Singapore, we watched this question very carefully, as you might expect. And our conclusion was that President Xi's determination to promote stability, to allow him to succeed in this project of the development of China and the upward mobility of these hundreds of millions of people in Chinese, demanded calm waters, not just across the Taiwan Strait, but also calm waters across the Pacific. I want to be respectful of time, and I know there are many questions. Terry, if you'll stick around, I'd like to
I will
pass the baton to our Chief Investment Officer. He's going to talk a little bit more technically about some of our products and performance, and then we're going to come back and have a substantial question and answer period. So thank you.
Okay, David.
Yeah, and thank you, Ambassador Branstad, and yeah, I'm really excited just for the opportunity for you to maybe share a little bit about President Xi's personality. I think you're just uniquely positioned where you actually have met both President Trump and President Xi. But I want to just talk real quickly about what's happening in terms of China's economy and capital markets. That we know China's economy has really struggled more recently, driven by a downturn in real estate prices, which has really weighed on consumer confidence due to 2/3 of urban household wealth is invested in real estate. And we've seen we're seeing a number of measures implemented thus far this year on an incremental basis. We've had some major events thus far, and I think that really starts on the next slide, that there's a number of things that we really recommend investors should be waiting for. We've obviously had most recently the National People Congress, what we'll get into. We're going through Q3's earnings season, which we'll touch base on Singles Day. Our main thesis has been there's a lot of good news coming as we look out the windshield, and a lot of the China narrative we think is looking through the rear view mirror. And we think as China's economy continues to kind of rebound, and I'll bet incrementally just based on the recent stimulus measures implemented, that this re-rating around China will occur. And we think that's only just begun. We think it's a very early innings in terms of this economic recovery, but also the stock market rebound. So on the next slide, we know we had this big National People's Congress where we saw a number of the fiscal budget expanded. I think the general narrative is that there's a little bit of a letdown, that the market's reaction after a very, very strong run up, it's natural that we're seeing a pullback here. we really think that the narrative misses that this was a lot stronger of a fiscal stimulus than I think the market's giving it credit. That a lot of the attention was due to repairing the balance sheet of local governments. And why we think that's a fiscal consumption employment stimulus is that in a lot of the poorer provinces in China, those local governments are very key to the local economy, including employment. And so by cleaning up these balance sheets, we think it actually goes a long way to actually restoring some of that consumer confidence as well as the broader economy. We think one of the issues was the actual initial headline, the initial release from the National People Congress just had 6 trillion in the headline. And it wasn't until the press conference and the Q&A reporters that they actually spoke about the additional 4 trillion of 4 trillion RMB, and then another 2 trillion. So in the aggregate, the actual headline was 6 trillion, when in fact the actual number was 12 trillion. So we think a little bit of an issue there. But we're, again, on the next slide, we're actually seeing a real initial pickup in terms of the reaction in China to the September, back in September 26th was when the PBOC unleashed its monetary and housing and stock market policy bazooka. And a lot of the cutting of interest rates, a lot of the measures taken in China were geared to stabilizing and repairing real estate. And without question, as you can see here, we're seeing transaction volumes, the number of housing sales over the last month. It's actually taking place. It actually is happening. And again, we can get real estate prices up. We think it will have an impact on consumer confidence. And on the next slide, you're actually seeing that the Citigroup's China Economic Surprise had flatlined, and starting with this stimulus, you see this vertical, the most recent PMIs, the purchasing manager indices, those surveys are improving. And I think that's something that's underestimated, that you argue this stimulus is having an effect on the real economy. I think our next thing is it having an effect on the balance sheets of the companies we are invested in? And I mentioned that today's China last night. I really wrote about the e-commerce company JD.com. Their CEO, Sandy Zhu, she wrote, and I don't, I just want to actually read what she said. Current macro policies have taken a positive effect on the overall consumption sentiment, and we expect these policies continue to take effect. This will help to improve the economic fundamentals and to help recover and improve household income, which will all provide more energy and to the consumption potential. I just think this is the CEO of a company that literally has its fingers on the pulse of the Chinese consumer. And there's actually a lot more that she wrote to.
I would add that they are the largest retailer in China, JD.com. So they really know what they're talking about. They're all over China.
Yeah, Terry, I'm voting their CEO she should get CEO of the year. She didn't mince words. I got her full comments in today's China last night. On the next slide, we just finished Singles Day, and actually, for U.S. regulatory reasons, the companies Alibaba and JD, they're not really allowed to talk about, or they were told by U.S. regulators not to talk about gross merchandise value, and that's because merchant GMV is not revenue. But there's a real-time data provider in China that reported, based on their analysis, that Singles Day went the GMV, the amount of goods sold, went up 26% year over year. Just outstanding results.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of investors And I think one of the questions I want to talk about is with you, Terry, that is about the composition of the some of the names that are likely to be part of the Trump cabinet. But I think there's one investor who's not been scared off, and one is the companies themselves. JD today said that they bought 8% of their shares outstanding year to date through the third quarter. They used up their entire repurchase program, so their board just went and approved another $5 billion buyback from JD.com. JD's total market cap is actually 50 billion US, so they're actually going to buy 10% of their market cap. Another company called NetEase reported earnings today. They said that their board approved a $5 billion buyback. And the other person who's not been scared buying back shares of Chinese companies are Chinese investors. And we can track that through, it's called Southbound Stock Connect right on HKX.com on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange website. You can actually track this. We do this for you. Year to date, mainland investors about $81 billion. Now this is as of yesterday, about even, because it's actually now it's 83.5. Investors from China bought $2.5 billion of Hong Kong shares today. That's 4.4 billion this week alone, and 83.5 year to date, more than twice. Then also, so there's an investor out there, like the CEO of JD, who's saying, if you want to throw away your shares, we'll take them. We'll buy them hand over fist for you. So we've got some slides for compliance purposes, and we want to get into the Q&A. But Terry, one of the questions I know our audience wants to hear about is the composition of the Trump cabinet. And I think, one of the things, Terry, is I've always thought, if you're going to negotiate, if President Trump's going to get a great deal for the American people, he needs some bad cops. And is some of the composition, and then obviously President Trump will be the good cop. He's got this bond that you spoke to with President Xi. But how is the composition of this cabinet thus far play into this kind of a bad cop negotiating a good deal with China on behalf of the American people?
Well, first of all, I think in his appointments, Trump wants people that are competent and loyal. And he's really, I think, doubled down on that. There won't be any of these never Trumpers that are longtime Republicans. They will be people that are loyal to him and his program. And I think that's one of the things that's really evident. There are some hardliners when it comes to foreign policy, but I think part of the problem is he thinks that the previous administration has been too soft, and that is exactly why we've had the invasion of Ukraine and the also Iran's supporting these terrorist groups in the Middle East. So he wants to address that in a strong, effective way. And that's why the issue with China may be more back burner to begin with. But I think in the long run, he recognizes that China is a very big and important player, and that we need to continue to export substantial products there, as well as treat them fairly in the process.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, Terry. Marco Rubio is such an interesting pick for Secretary of State. I remember when I was running the U.S. Embassy in Singapore, he had a strong interest in Southeast Asia and in international relations generally. He was really sort of an internationalist. I want to be careful saying that, but he was very interested in U.S. allies and building partnerships. That goes back to shortly after his election in 2010. I know that his rhetoric has evolved, and he's now sort of counted amongst the hardliners. But I've taken his measure, and I know you have as well, and I think he's very He's obviously interested in promoting the continuation of America's primacy in the world, but I think he's a good pick because he's interested in doing so through forging diplomatic ties. And I would expect that by the time the dust settles, Marco Rubio is sort of at the table and part of grand bargains across the Pacific.
Well, he's been a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And when I was appointed, he had some kind of negative things to say about the fact that Xi Jinping calls me an old friend. But in the end, he did support my confirmation. And I've had a good relationship with him, as my son has. And so, and I think he's got significant bipartisan support. So, and again, I think it goes back to the old saying that Ronald Reagan used to use, and that is, we need to, the way we're successful is peace through strength. So I think it's going to be peace through strength, and using that fact that we have hardliners in many of these key positions as a way to demonstrate American strength. And the idea is, don't tread on us, because you will regret it.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And again, if you want to submit any questions, please, if you're joining us on Zoom, use the Q&A button. If you're joining us on craneshares.com, please email us at info@craneshares.com, and we'll get these questions to Terry and David. One question we've gotten, ambassadors, is around potential, and you touched on this a little bit, Terry, was potential limitations on U.S. investors in China. And Terry, you touched on, seems very logical. I don't think any U.S. investor has any interest in investing in Chinese defense companies, but is it feasible that you'd see a more broad ban on investing in China? And I think that's against, there's obviously a lot of Chinese companies that have listed here in the United States. But is that something that you think would be on the radar for a second Trump term?
I think it's evolved, even during the Biden administration, to a more broad view of what is defense. And consequently, I think you will see scrutiny of things that are defense oriented. Also, Chinese students that are in some of these very technical defense areas. In fact, we've had cases where members of the PLA have posed as students at our universities. And during the previous Trump administration, a number of those people were deported, or a few were prosecuted, but others agreed to leave voluntarily.
And in terms of President Trump, obviously in mid-January comes into office. Question from our friend Stefano. What is that first 100 days? What do you think he hits the ground running on? And I've kind of thought about that a little bit, Terry, just around, you've got the midterms about 2 years away. Do you try to do the China deal first, or do you back burner it? Because you got this unique window where you've got the White House, Senate, and the House. So do you push a little bit more of a domestic agenda while you've got that policy tailwind? And does that put China forward, or where does it maybe fall on the list, in your opinion?
I think the focus is going to be on deporting the criminals and bad actors that have entered this country, and extending the tax cuts that were Trump passed during his first term that are set to expire. So I think that will be a priority, but I also think that he's going to continue to look at how you strengthen the American economy, and obviously trade is part of that.
And I guess I would add, Brendan, that I think we'll find that the Trump administration execution of American foreign policy in Asia is going to be about reassuring our friends and partners in Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, the Japanese, the Koreans, and our friends in the ASEAN countries, and what American diplomats are going to hear from their counterparts in those capitals is urging that there be calm waters, that there be stability. In Singapore, for example, the most trade-dependent economy in the world, they only seek stability. They see sort of the two big actors needing to get along. That sort of the choppy waters in the Pacific serve no one. And I can expect those messages will be well received in the Oval Office, as well as in the ambassador's seat in Beijing. So managing this relationship will be a priority so as not to distract from the Trump administration's domestic priorities on taxes, immigration, and the other issues Terry has mentioned.
Yeah, and I think he wants to resolve the wars that are going on in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And if that can be done, I think that's helpful to, assuring people of stability. And Trump likes to point out the fact that these wars didn't happen when he was president, and he wants to see them ended, but that's easier said than done. So that's going to be one of the challenges, is to try to resolve it in a way that's acceptable.
And one of the question from our good friend Jamil, staying up late from London across the pond. But good friend Jamil was curious. What do we think? What would the two ambassadors think about Elon Musk's role in the new cabinet, as well as in potentially acting as a bridge between China and the United States?
Well, Elon Musk has been very successful in about everything he's done. And I suspect that his advice and his recommendations, and I would say it's long overdue. When I was governor, we did a major reorganization and downsizing of state government. And my successor, Kim Reynolds, did the same thing again last year. About every 20 or 30 years it needs to be done. It's not been done at the federal level. And I think it's going to be deeper and more significant because of Elon Musk and Ramaswamy. I think that they're going to make significant recommendations from the outside. There's a tendency for government at all levels to want to grow, and the federal government is out of control. I think one of the first things is they're going to say, if you're going to be employed in a federal agency, you're going to have to come to work. You can't work from home anymore. And so a bunch of people may quit because of that.
Yeah, look, I would add, Elon Musk is a big thinker. I don't know as much about sort of the efficiency measures he wants to bring to the federal government, but I do know this: he's an international businessman. All of his businesses have made substantial investments in China, Tesla at the top of the list. The supply chains for his businesses are global supply chains. When I was lucky enough to visit SpaceX some years ago, it was clear that the SpaceX brief is not just about being part of America's program, but being part of sort of global initiatives. So people get, I think, distracted by some of the antics and, I suppose, eccentricities around Elon Musk. But the truth is, I think his involvement close by to President Trump is good for U.S.-China relations and likely good for sort of global stability. Yeah, he has a world view rather than, I guess, a Washington, D.C. view.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that he comes from that business background with a world view is all the more reason why his recommendations on trimming the size and the cost of the federal bureaucracy will be well received. People see what he's done with X. I think that the number of people employed there is dramatically reduced, and they've been very successful. And a lot of people thought financially that was going to be a big risk for him, but his stock has done pretty well as of late.
In so many ways, Washington, D.C. is out of step on U.S.-China relations. When you talk to business leaders in Silicon Valley or Hollywood or agribusiness leaders, where you sit, Terry, in America's heartland, they're interested in global trade. They're interested in global capital flows, and Elon Musk comes from that world, not from the inside the Beltway world.
That's right. I agree with you there. I think that it's an exciting time, and we're going to see dramatic change.
Yep. Another question from another old friend of ours, a good friend, Andy Wang of Andy is a longtime friend of Crane Shares from across the Hudson, not across the pond. But he has a question, just Terry and David, just around, how do you envision, you touched on, we hear this rhetoric of a broad 60% tariff, but what do you think that it really plays out? I mean, I know from the first time to Terry, you touched and David touched on some of the exemptions. Do you envision something kind of similar that you have these exceptions, and then in that same vein is, what does China have to give? And it's kind of funny because the CEO of CATL said, I would build a factory in the United States if I was allowed. Actually said he was told he wasn't allowed, but could you envision part of the potential for the bargaining of Chinese companies setting up shop here in the U.S.? And I kind of, couldn't we envision CATL batteries going into Teslas made here in the U.S.? But against this how do we discern this broad 60% tariffs? And
that might be a way to avoid the tariffs and put American workers to work and improve their livelihood. So I could see that as something that could get worked out. Just because it hasn't been permitted in the past doesn't mean that as part of a grand deal, it couldn't happen.
Yeah, and I'll say, while there are important distinctions, the experience of Japanese automakers and more recently Korean automakers in the United States is instructive. A lot of attention has been paid to Chinese electric vehicle superiority, if you will. And Terry, you and I were in China together, and
we saw it
firsthand view of the power of their EV manufacturing systems. But I think if President Trump is interested in putting Americans to work, he'll welcome foreign investment, including foreign investment, not defense related, but foreign investment in the United States from China. It's complicated. It's not exactly the same as our allies, the Koreans and the Japanese, but nonetheless, money talks. And if Chinese firms can create U.S. jobs, I would expect Donald Trump and his team to find a way to make that work.
When I was governor, I actively and aggressively sought international investments, and Korea and Japan were a couple of the big ones, but we also had a number from Europe. And the result is Iowa has a much more diversified economy. We're adding value to what we produce in agriculture more. And today, Iowa's economy is a lot stronger than it was when I was first governor. And I'm proud to say that we built that with getting significant investments, both domestic and internationally, and reducing our taxes and our regulatory burden. And I see Trump's going to try to do that at the federal level. He did it the first time around. I think it'll be even more aggressive this time.
Brendan, I don't know if you want to try one or two more questions. Terry, if you'll allow us to run over another minute or two, we'd be grateful.
Sure, we'll do it.
Thank you, Terry. A question from another good friend of ours, Sheldon. Sheldon asks, do you envision another business person who's had a long history and investing here in the U.S. but also in China, Steve Schwartzman? And any thoughts on Schwartzman potentially being an element of the cabinet or potentially as an advisor to President Trump?
Well, I know that when I suggested to Trump that he bring business leaders with him on that 2017 trip to China, he got Schwartzman on the phone, and Schwartzman played a key role in helping put that together. So I think that the relationship, again, that goes back a few years, but I think Schwartzman could well be somebody that I don't know if he'll play a formal role in the administration, but I think he's an advisor that Trump respects and trusts.
That's very interesting. Okay. Let me see.
Yeah, and you know, American presidents historically have not taken business people with them on these visits, like and trade mission, or what I call trade missions, but formal visits to other countries. But Trump did it in 2017, and obviously the Department of Commerce played a key role in that too. And so I'm hopeful that that will be done again because of, you know, and well, you can see Trump likes to surround himself with successful business people.
Yeah, it's very encouraging. I think, you know, keeping an eye on Steve Schwartzman is good advice, and it's especially encouraging for those of us, you know, who are hopeful for you know, constructive U.S.-China relations and
Right.
this sort of peace through strength, or you know, trade through leverage, if you will.
Good point.
Yeah. Brendan and Terry, thank you very much for the time. I want to thank the many hundreds of people who have participated. By all means, if you have follow-up questions, send them through to us at info@craneshares.com. Terry Branstad, I want to thank you for your personal friendship, and I want to thank you for your continued good advice and friendship to Crane Shares and to Brendan and our other colleagues. We're grateful for your government service, and I don't want to let this meeting pass without me also thanking you for your leadership of the World Food Prize Foundation. It's a very important institution. It's another example of good works that bring people together, that knows no boundaries, knows no politics, but is all about feeding the hungry around the world. And thank you for your devotion and your leadership of that organization.
Well, you were here when we had the Borlaug Dialogue 2 weeks ago. We had 1,500 people from over 70 countries. So we're real proud of that. It was a great success. And I want to thank you and David Edelman. I want you, David Edelman, and also Jonathan Crane for supporting the World Food Prize and attending our big event. So again, Brendan, thank you. And to all the Crane Share investors, I'm honored and proud to have an opportunity to share my thoughts and experience with you.
Thank you so much, Terry.
You're welcome. Take care.